What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. In late 2015, Putin promised to do everything possible to help Bashar al-Assad, Syria and its people, in case there are any external or internal threats. And during these long 9 years, the Russian propaganda portrayed Syria as a big friend of Russia. All of this collapsed in under just 1 week. And I'm not just talking about the regime of Bashar al-Assad. I'm also talking about the so-called friendly allied relations that Putin and Syria had. The Kremlin's position began shifting in both tone and execution. The Russian leadership found itself trying to justify its presence in the Middle East, downplaying its commitments, and ultimately trying to alter the narrative of what Syria meant to Moscow's foreign policy. The attempt to retroactively minimize Syria's importance and to reshape the narrative of the operation as a minor activity reveals far more than a mere propaganda tactic. It emphasizes Russia's declining credibility as an ally and power nation, the fragility of its strategic goals, and the uncertain legacy its actions will leave for the future of global politics. Bashar al-Assad was absolutely betrayed by Putin. At least he was given the political asylum in Moscow, and still, this was most likely done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, not Putin himself. Imagine, for example, yourself and your good friend having the time of your lives. And then you say, "Bro, no matter what, I'm always here for you. Any problem you got, just call me. We're gonna sort things out." I'm sure you guys experienced this situation and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then, several years later, when you and your friend walk on the street, a group of hooligans approaches you both and start harassing your friend. Your so-called bro looks at you for help, while you just slowly turn around, nod your head and quietly leave. Your friend gets beaten, tries to escape, and out of pure desperation, even though he knows you betrayed him, he asks to hide in your apartment until the hooligans leave. You ask your spouse to open the door and you lock yourself in another room. God forbid you lock eyes with your friend right now. Or better say, acquaintance already at this point. This is precisely what happened between Putin and Bashar al-Assad in these last few days. The reputational damage to Russia as a weak partner and incompetent ally is done. And Bashar did not even have to say a single word. Everyone understood everything without saying. When Russia entered Syrian conflict in 2015, the initial goals appeared ambitious and clearly defined. The Kremlin not only wanted to show the support for the Assad's regime, which was struggling under the weight of multiple enemies, both external and internal, but also sought to expand Russian military influence across the entire Middle East, if possible, and the Mediterranean. Moscow's footholds and the Khmeim air base in Latakia and the naval facility in Tartus were not short-term projects. They were intended as permanent installations that would anchor Russian interests for decades to come. These bases symbolized a rising dedication on restoring its influence far beyond its immediate neighborhood. At the time, Russia portrayed itself as the indispensable provider of peace, keeping local extremist factions in check and contributing to the broader international struggle against the other major terroristic group. Yet, beneath this facade of strength, the Russian leadership made subtle concessions. There was that pivotal statement from President Vladimir Putin, who said the following: "We do not want to be more Syrian than Syrians themselves." At first glance, it suggested Russia respected Syria's sovereignty and would follow Damascus' lead in determining which factions to target. Over time, however, that sentiment was repurposed to mean something entirely different. By suggesting that Russia never intended to overinvest in Syria's fate, it set the stage for subsequent retreat. Especially when the geopolitical terrain shifted and Moscow's attention and resources grew scarce. Basically what it means is that whenever Putin was asked whether his soldiers will fight alongside Syrians against any threat, Putin replied, "We'll be there," trying to be as ambiguous as possible. So eventually, when the time comes and if the Syrian leadership will ask Russians, "Why are you not helping us fight?" the reply will be the following: "Well, we are in Syria, we told you we will be here. We did not say anything about fighting." As the conflict in Syria evolved, so too did Russia's narrative. The Kremlin's media outlets have repeatedly referenced out-of-context presidential remarks to imply that Syria never truly mattered as a strategic asset. While taking things out of context is usually the method of opposition forces, when your own propaganda machine uses this shady tactic, it only tells you how sleazy the regime truly is. As the situation grows more unstable, Russian commentators seek to diminish the scale of what was once presented as a major foreign policy triumph. Suddenly, decades-long bases which used to be proudly presented as signs of regional dominance appeared as unwanted burdens. The footholds at the Khmeim air base in Latakia and the naval facility in Tartus, which took so much time, money and effort to build, now started to be presented by the Russian propaganda as just mere temporarily, literally tent cities. The Kremlin's speakers have also begun rebranding the local militant factions. Groups once undeniably labeled as terrorists are now described in more muted terms, sometimes even as legitimate opposition actors, worthy of negotiations. Exactly the same thing that happened with Taliban, with who Russia now even seeks to establish diplomatic relations. How ridiculous is this? This rhetorical pivot mirrors the rapid shift Russia made when it tried to rehabilitate its image elsewhere, turning former enemies into not quite enemies. Everyone deserves a chance to explain and redeem themselves. Even though Putin himself back in 2000s said that no terrorist ever is worth a second chance of negotiations, they should be followed, prosecuted and eliminated forever and everywhere. Basically, what we are witnessing here is a desperate attempt to present defeats or forced withdrawals as planned reassessments of the rapidly changing situation. Sounds like tactical retreat in Ukraine, right? So yeah. Yet memory does not vanish so easily. The world remembers Putin's loud statements of permanent Mediterranean outposts and sees clearly now how they are being quietly abandoned. Even allies and adversaries who initially marveled at Russian resolve cannot ignore how swiftly that confidence has disappeared. It is very dangerous when your enemies discover your weaknesses. It is even more disastrous when your friends see them as well. A far bigger consequence of these shifting narratives lies in their broader geopolitical ramifications. Russia's abrupt pivot in Syria is pretty much the same as other reversals in other regional areas, most notably in the South Caucasus, where Moscow's inconsistent support for long-time partners alienated traditional allies and revealed the hollow nature of Russian security guarantees. And by the way, Putin Russia, or I better say Putin, and security guarantees in the same sentence should be illegal, in my opinion. But yeah. The wavering stance on Syria reinforces the perception that Putin cannot be trusted to stand by his promises and commitments, even in theaters where he has invested significant resources and prestige, which, to be honest, is surprising, knowing that the entire regime of Putin is built on projecting the image of strength and respect. But well, apparently all this was a lie too. What a surprise. The international community sees it clearly. Hopefully the people of Russia will see it too. That he is just a mortal man. If you remove the police and other guardians of the order, there will be absolutely no one to defend him. I only wonder where Putin will flee in case his regime is in danger. Belarus, North Korea? Let me know, guys, what do you think? So yeah, back to Syria. Then came the Astana peace talks on Syria, once co-sponsored by Russia and presented as a high-level diplomatic achievement, and they have now lost all of its momentum, obviously. Regional players like Turkey, Israel, Iran and Gulf states and the Kurds no longer need to rely so heavily on Russian participation. They witness an actor who, by choosing to prioritize a costly and prolonged war in Ukraine, has destroyed its own image of strength it gained during its earlier campaigns. The outcome is a reduced ability to shape events, and eroded claim to reliability, and the knowledge that future partners will remember these betrayals when Russia seeks to reassert its influence. Who will be there to help Putin rebuild his presence? More importantly, who will now ever trust him? In the midst of its unfolding events, the unintended consequences are mounting. Syria, now splintered among various factions, has become a training center that allows to acquire combat experience, weaponry and propaganda material from militants. That's exactly what I was talking about in my previous video, when I mentioned that removing Bashar al-Assad from power is not enough to save Syria. This is just a first step, and much bigger difficulties are coming. Russia once prided itself on helping extinguish extremist groups, yet its current half measures and final withdrawal may ultimately leave behind a more volatile environment. Just like an ex-Prime Minister of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, once said, "We wanted to make things better, but eventually everything turned out to be exactly the same." The phrase loses some of its charm during the translation, but you guys get the idea. As a result of complete political failure of Russia in Syria, the militant factions, much like Chechens in the 1990s, realized that Russian military once feared can be fought and destroyed. Ukrainians proved this idea once again, embedding this knowledge into the minds of the world for decades to come. This realization will spread among both friends and enemies. The original aspiration was that by defending Assad, establishing bases and demonstrating influence in Syria, Putin would create a nice reputation for himself in the Middle East, ensuring strategic depth and international prestige. Instead, he ended up demonstrating that his commitments and especially promises were conditional and very easily reversed when domestic or other foreign priorities become more pressing. And he does not even need to have an actual good reason, quote-unquote, to back down from his promises. He can just make any other problem seem so significant that making him follow up on his promises he made earlier, it will feel like just a secondary thing. The principle that foreign policy is best built on domestic prosperity, stability and international goodwill rather than forceful interventions appears now more convincing than ever. And then, the war in Ukraine has shattered whatever illusions left that Putin's reputation, once carefully cultivated, can remain intact through simplistic shows of might. He always runs away from Moscow when dangers reveal themselves. Think about Prigozhin's mutiny once again. It made Putin silent for days. Nobody knew where was he or what he was doing. Just for him to do a midnight announcement that the betrayers will never be forgiven. Now imagine what will happen if the people of Russia will actually press forward and not stop in the face of temporary danger. As soon as they realize their power and find their strength, the regime will collapse, as fast as US could have never imagined. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode in this new studio, please subscribe to my channel. If you want to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow. We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.